This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening, one and all. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio with me, Adam Colbeck, for the Monday Twilight Show. Tonight, we're going to be delving back into all things instructional coaching, but with a particular angle on implementation this evening. My guest, Paul Klein, is an expert on the area, and I'm really looking forward to delving into the challenges of implementation with Paul tonight.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
So, instructional coaching, it is all the rage. Everybody is talking about it, and everybody, it seems, is trying to do a version of instructional coaching in one form or another. There's lots of discourse on social media and in the wider sector itself about what exactly instructional coaching is, the different models of instructional coaching, the different aims of instructional coaching, what it is that qualifies any form of coaching as instructional coaching. We've still got one of the main sort of misconceptions about instructional coaching overall, which is that the word instructional actually refers to the style of coaching, which is not the case. Instructional in instructional coaching literally means coaching of instruction, coaching of teaching. But that aside, there are lots and lots of different arguments that sit on one side or the other of the various debates around instructional coaching, and all of them have merit. And you'd be forgiven as a school leader for not really knowing where to begin with your thinking around how to implement instructional coaching and what the best way is to go. So part of what we're going to try and do tonight is kind of unpack some of the different implementation challenges and implementation options that leaders have, with the hope of listeners being able to come away from that with a little bit more clarity around what exactly instructional coaching is and what it might mean for you in your setting and in your context, and what might be the right approach for you to take as leaders trying to make teacher development a better thing and a more effective thing within your establishments. So, as I say, instructional coaching is something that everybody is talking about at the moment, and it's something that, aside from actually the mechanics of how a coaching session work, there are wider issues for leaders around how it's implemented and whether it's actually worth implementing it as well. Because there's lots of talk about how effective instructional coaching is, and Sam Sims back in 2017 said that it's currently the best evidence base of teacher development available to us as school leaders. But that doesn't mean that it's not without its challenges, and it doesn't mean that it's not without a significant investment. So instructional coaching at its most effective, in terms of how I've seen it, requires a big investment of time and resources from leaders. It's the time to free up coaches to go into lessons and to watch teachers. It's then the time to free up for coaches to feedback and have those instructional coaching conversation with teachers as well. But more than that, it's about creating the headspace within your organization as well. Where I've seen instructional coaching not work as well as what it can do in organizations is where it doesn't align with some of the other initiatives that are going on in the school, or where there is just so much going on in the school that instructional coaching becomes something of a tick box exercise. It's another thing on the to-do list that coaches and teachers alike end up just ticking off to say, yeah, we've done that. We've done our instructional coaching session for the week. Let's move on to the next thing, be it planning or marking or report writing or whatever else. So for instructional coaching to have the organizational impact at scale, and that's one of the biggest challenges that I know I'm going to be getting into tonight with Paul, if we want it to have the impact at scale, we need to make sure that we're aware of culturally what else is going on in the organization at the same time as us trying to implement instructional coaching. Are we allowing our teachers and coaches the headspace to focus hard and think hard about getting better at the craft of teaching? Because if we can't devote that headspace to it, it's unlikely that even if we devote physical space to it and physical resources and money to it, it's unlikely it's going to have the impact that we want it to have. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring Paul into the studio. Paul, can you hear us?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. Now, last week we actually attempted this pod, didn't we?
Yeah.
And we got about 45 minutes in. We did pretty well. I was on a school residential, and we started the first half of the recording at a service station, and then we attempted the second half on the coach with me sort of sat in the portaloo of the coach, and it all kind of went a little bit wrong from there, didn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't when someone said, "Do you want to be on the radio?" It wasn't what I first envisaged as that dynamic happening. What with Glastonbury happening this weekend, I don't think it's quite the same thing.
Yeah, it's not quite the glamour of Glastonbury, was it?
No.
Good stuff. So Paul, for those people that maybe didn't listen to our previous show, so we did a show probably a couple of months back now, didn't we? All about instructional coaching, and that was more around sort of the mechanics of an instructional coaching session, as you saw it and as we see it. But do you want to just give everybody a little bit of a background of you, how you've come to have this interest in teacher development and instructional coaching, and maybe a little bit about what your sort of current thinking on the matter is?
Yeah, sure. So I started out as a psychology teacher, and I've always been sort of interested in teaching and learning, and that sort of came very early on from my experiences, my mentor, and how I was kind of introduced to the idea of sort of being evidence informed. But I started where I currently am as just a head of psychology. But kind of got interested in being more involved in the teaching learning side and took on the role of director of teaching and learning about 4 or 5 years ago now. And when I took that job on, I would say that our teaching and learning and professional development offering was sort of very much like a lot of schools were 5-10 years ago. Some maybe still are, that we had sort of our CPD was just twilight sessions that people could turn up to if they wished. But it was really, some people would come regularly, some people never came at all. And there were lots of issues around that. We had a traditional lesson observation format where you were reserved for a full lesson and it was graded and there was a whole feedback shebang and all of that kind of thing. And we had a performance management system that really didn't seem to be doing much, and had, the kinds of targets, again, that people were expected to achieve that really didn't have a huge amount of control over. And there wasn't really a sense of this is actually going to help people get better. So one of the very first things we did was to say, well, hang on, let's talk about the observations, because that's a thing that no one likes, really. We're doing it because that's what we've always done. Let's think about that first. Read around, a lot of the literature and around lesson observations, the work of people like Rob Coe, and it was really clear that we needed to get rid of that. And we thought, well, we've got to replace it with something. What are we going to do instead? Because we still think there's value in going and watching teachers. And it was at the same time that I happened to come across quite a lot of reading around instructional coaching. It was gaining quite a lot of traction on social media. A colleague had read something about it and been on a course where it had been mentioned in a different context, and through the work of Bambrick Santoyo. And so we looked at it and thought, actually, this might be something that we want to introduce in our school. And so we've been doing that for about 3 years now. We're still, I would say, at quite almost not a pilot stage, but at quite a small scale. And I know we're going to get into some of the sort of specifics later, but for us, growing that has been incredibly slow, and we're still working out how we're doing that. And I think that for us was quite an important thing, was that we wanted to start small. But I know that that's not always the way that it gets implemented. And I know that in your setting, you've kind of come at it from a slightly different approach, haven't you?
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, with us, we've kind of gone, I guess, really, we've kind of used different models of what I would loosely describe as coaching. And I'm aware that if I sort of describe what we've done, there's certainly bits of it that people listening will go, that's not coaching, or that's not instructional coaching. And maybe it's not, to be honest, but I think that's one of the big sort of implementation considerations, really, is that you've got to be research informed, but context led. And I think what I mean by that is that, yeah, absolutely. Let's understand what all of the best research tells us about the best models and what's most likely to work. But ultimately, how that's applied in practice, if you can see a contextual barrier to that, you'd be daft not to kind of tweak it to make sure that your implementation strategy and the model of coaching that you're using in your school is fit for the context at the time. So with my school, when I arrived at my current school sort of 2.5 years ago, it had been through, and it was in the midst of really like a lot of wholesale change. So in the last 2.5 years, if you include like the 3 months that I was acting head, there's been 6 different head teachers now in the last 2.5 years, which is
Wow.
which is absolutely massive. So when
That's
I
like
was coming in,
education secretary kind of league, isn't it?
to be honest, he was probably next on the list, old Gavin Williamson. If this head teacher hadn't worked out, I'm sure they'd have gone for him. But this head teacher is working out, and she's brilliant. Just in case she's listening, but she genuinely is really, really good. But yeah, because of that, like it was an environment where no one really knew whether they were coming or going. People had kind of had sort of lurched from initiative to from change to change, this direction to that direction. And so my first thing that I wanted to do was try and sort of bring everything together. And so I knew that I knew I needed people to start talking about teaching and start getting interested in teaching again, because that wasn't something that they were doing. They were basically talking about how to survive and how to make sure that the latest bit of paper was in the right place at the right time and that kind of thing. So there was a real loss of interest around teaching. But I also knew that just letting people talk randomly about teaching wasn't going to be particularly helpful, because everybody had different mental models and was coming at it from different starting points. So I wanted to have like a shared language of teaching and learning. So we came up with 7 key guiding principles of teaching and learning. And then we just set about basically facilitating teacher talk off the back of watching each other's lessons in each of those 7 areas. So we'd have one driving principle per half term, and we'd have teachers in pairs, and they'd watch each other try and put this principle into practice using different strategies, and they'd meet once a week and talk about it. So there was really no more structure to it other than that. But what it did was it got everybody together talking about teaching, interested in teaching, excited about teaching again, and it gave us like a shared language. And then from there, in kind of year 2 and now into year 3, we've kind of gradually formalized a system that people would probably recognize more as instructional coaching. And we make use of StepLab at the moment as well, which is a platform I know lots of people use. But you don't have to use a particular platform. It is entirely up to you, whichever kind of model you want to go with, and other platforms are available as well. But yeah, we've kind of formalized it over time, but having started with a really, really kind of loose model of coaching. But like I say, I think it's important to match your model to the needs of the school at the time.
Yeah, and I think there's like a couple of interesting things there. Is like, firstly, that idea of it very much being seen as something that's part of your whole provision. I think you mentioned that in your opening bit as well, that instructional coaching is one form of delivering PD, but it's not the only thing, and it's not necessarily the thing that should be the sole focus of your model. And that's what we're doing instructional coaching. It should form part of a coherent picture of lots of different provision that all kind of work together. That was, I think for us, that was kind of one of the really important things, was that it was definitely a strand alongside lots of other things, and that hopefully our CPD program is now much more joined up. And so when we're doing coaching, we're able to reference things that we talked about in CPD, and our appraisal system is linked to that as well. Again, it's all developmental, and no sort of, you've got to hit this many grade, this is by the end of the year, and all that nonsense, that data-driven targets that we used to have. But it's about, it follows a coaching ethos in that it's about selecting a small area of your teaching to work on and have that as your focus over a term, say, or a bit longer. And then just have essentially a check-in conversation with your appraiser. So even people who aren't in our sort of official coaching program, who are doing the proper cycle of fortnightly meetings, are still actually sort of having that ethos driving what they're doing, and that it all kind of fits together. So I think that's kind of super important. And I think the other thing, it's about, you say about knowing your context and appreciating that, like, to build a good model of any kind of professional development, particularly instructional coaching, just is going to take some time, and it's going to take lots of iterations and lots of getting it wrong and fiddling about with it and figuring out what we're doing and changing things and what have you. And that again, that's okay, as long as everyone's on board with this is what's going on and this is why we're doing it. Then that's fine, and the model that you'll end up with in 5 years is very different to the one that you've got now. And I think one of the challenges for anyone who's trying to implement it is to look at schools who are doing it and who are maybe 5-7 years down that road, to then go, all right, we want to be there, and not go, oh, hang on, it's taken them 5 years to get there, we're not going to do it in 18 months. And in fact, I remember having a conversation with somebody in my organisation at one point, fairly early on, who had read something that I'd sent them about, implementation and what it might look like, and said, "Oh yeah, I think we can be there by next year." And I thought, "Oh, hang on, let's slow down a bit." And all that stuff about getting the culture right and the conditions and the shared language, it's all got to be in place if instructional coaching is going to land really well. And you can use instructional coaching as a vehicle to try and develop some of that, but it's going to work much better if a lot of those conditions are already in place in many contexts.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You can make it look like instructional coaching is really, really well embedded pretty quick, if you want to, because ultimately it's about designing. You can design a system and a way of structure is a great word for it. Yeah, you can design a structure and go, guys, put that structure into practice. But ultimately, I think, in my experience anyway, instructional coaching is as much a mindset as it is a mode of professional development as well. And I think you've got to take time to kind of build that mindset. And like an example I'd give there is like I've been to watch teachers in my own school going in to watch teachers. So observing the observation, if you like. And I know they've told me what it is that they've been working on with that teacher, and it's perhaps it's cold calling or something, and they go into that lesson, and the teacher looks up and they see the coach come in, and you can almost see them twig, and they go, oh yeah, I better do cold calling because that's the thing that we've been working on at the moment. So okay guys, quick question, and I'm going to cold call you, hands down, bang. And it's very simple there to make it look like, oh yeah, those two people have been working on the use of cold call. They've scripted this strategy really, really well, and they've executed that strategy. Kind of, that's an example of job done. But on the flip side, so I've got someone that I'm coaching at the moment, and we were working on building in more time to think with the questions that she was asking. So she asks fantastic questions that I think drive thought really, really effectively, but doesn't always allow the thinking time and doesn't always create the climate for children to really know that the thinking time is valuable. So we were working on a strategy for that, and we'd done lots of kind of modelling and rehearsal on it, mainly within maths. And then I went in to watch her during a writing lesson with primary, and I could see her sort of looking for an opportunity to weave it in, but the opportunity just wasn't there, and it wasn't coming. And she didn't do it. And I was there for sort of 20 minutes or so, and she didn't do it. And I almost came out of that actually quite pleased that she didn't do it, because she hadn't tried to shoehorn it in when it wasn't fitting. And then the conversation that we had after that was about, oh, okay, so how come that didn't fit? And the two of us just worked through the fact that actually this particular strategy lent itself really, really nicely to a maths context, but was much harder to implement within writing, and so we had to tweak the strategy accordingly. And so we were kind of learning together in that moment from that sort of shared experience of being in that lesson together. But that comes from having from instructional coaching being a really, really safe mindset for people to be in.
Definitely. And I know that like Jim Knight talks about this, teachers and coaches are partners, and that's a really powerful way of visualizing it and conceptualizing it, that you're working together. And what you've described there really demonstrates that it's so easy for it to be perceived as, or even become very much a top-down coach is the expert, even a really thorough and well-meaning and well-liked one, and you have their respect and everything, but still they're in the power and they've got the knowledge, and they're going to tell you what's what. But actually, to approach that from a partnership perspective and say, right, I'm going to learn from you here, and I think in many cases, and again I suspect even more so in secondary, you're working with people who are far more expert in their subject than you are. So I'm a psychology teacher, and I work with people in history and English and maths and whatever, and they know way more about their subject. So I have to go in with the expectation that they're going to tell me stuff I don't know, and that I might not be the best placed person to say something about what happened in their lesson in some respects, because I don't understand the curriculum in the way that they do. And that, so therefore, that having that at the forefront of your mind, that this is a partnership, we're going to work together on it, is really, really crucial, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And just before we go to our first ad break as well, I think it's important to kind of mention here that that although social media will sometimes make it look like there are kind of two or sometimes more sort of sides to this debate, there's often far more similarity than what may first appear. I don't actually think that anybody is arguing that coaches and teachers shouldn't work in partnership or work together, and that coaches bring a model of expertise, a type of expertise to that dynamic, but that also teachers bring their own contextual expertise to it. Even if they're novice teachers, they're bringing the contextual expertise of their class. And so the sort of merging together of those two types of expertise to then try and move that teacher's practice forward, I think is something that everybody would agree with, whatever kind of theoretical side of this debate it appears you would fall on. Okay, let's go to our first ad break and hear from our friends and sponsors, and then when we get back, we'll dive a little bit more into the implementation challenges.
Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org. Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now you can with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised social platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with their peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques, designed to help you quickly and easily implement high-impact practices that boost student engagement and improve learning outcomes. Join over 200 institutions worldwide that are elevating their teaching practices with the How-To app. No gurus, just practical support anytime you need it. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for our next webinar.
Empowering education with Easy4U, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy4U, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easy4u.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by thought leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The lineup included renowned speakers such as TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, and beloved children's author Michael Rosen. The three-day conference explored a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free by visiting the Reading Solutions UK website at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk.
Okay, welcome back. So, Paul, let's dive straight in then. What are the biggest implementation challenges with instructional coaching as you see them?
Well, it's a big thorny question because I think there's quite a lot, and I think alluding to what you've already said, so much of that is entirely context dependent. So I think first it's actually recognizing what are the specifics of the context and what that impact has on, what the impact of that context is on your implementation choices. So things like school size is going to be a massive one to consider, because trying to introduce instructional coaching in a school of, say, 10 teachers is a whole different problem to trying to do it in a school of, say, 100. And that's going to have effects on sort of the decisions that you make in terms of how you do it and the structures that you set up in place within that. One of the sort of related challenges there is going to be the who's doing the coaching. So we mentioned earlier the idea that we might have, so like in my school, we have a small group of people being coached, and currently we just have 2 people working as coaches. In your school, you've got a setup where essentially it's peer coaching and everyone coaches each other. And there are, absolutely strengths and weaknesses of both of those models. But it's a really important consideration for what's right for your context. One of the really key things I think that comes into that is that sort of, we alluded to it again earlier, that like power dynamic. Who is it who's a coach? Is it somebody on senior leadership, or is it one of your peers? Because that can have a huge impact again on the coaching relationship. And of course, there's plenty of settings where senior leaders can work really well as coaches, but it's easy to see how that could be also really, really problematic, particularly if you're coaching somebody let's say that you line manage. So I think those related things of the size of the school, the number of staff, and how many people you want to get on coaching and who's going to do the coaching, I think they're all interconnected, and are really big things that leaders are going to have to think hard about, again, before just running straight in and going, let's do coaching, working out which of those models is going to work before they get going. And again, as we said earlier, be open to the fact that whatever you start with might need to change quite a lot as it evolves, because it either isn't working or for whatever reason that it ends up being a little bit different.
Yeah, and those are really, really succinct and well put points there. I think that the example of my school where you're right. So up until now, we have kind of operated a peer-to-peer coaching model, and we've done our best to kind of support the development of all staff as coaches, alongside the development of them as teachers as well. I think, and again, this ties into your point about context and being kind of really aware and ready to respond to the shifting context of your school as well. I think we've actually got it to a point where all the teachers understand what our model of coaching looks like. They can run an instructional coaching session, but I'm not sure that we're going to move that on any further unless we do some really extended work with them as coaches. And I think at that point, we're at the point where really now, to get better at coaching, we're going to have to be asking for more commitment from the coaches to get that little bit better at it, to move on to that next level. I suspect that we'll get to a point where people go, this is actually, I'm quite comfortable where I am at the moment with this. And I think that's probably right. As we progress as a school, the model that I can see us adopting is one that's probably going to have like 4 different levels to it, if you like. I can see us having a model for trainee teachers, and that's, we take that, our responsibility to trainee teachers, really seriously. So if we have students from universities, we take that really, really seriously. We don't just use them as cover. We see it as a development opportunity for a teacher to become their mentor. But we'd still expect that mentor to use instructional coaching as the primary method of development of that teacher. But because there's such an emergent mental model for that student, it's a particular type of instructional coaching that's going to be more directive. Then we've got our ECT program, and again, we'd use instructional coaching for that as well. But because the ECT program is an induction, we'd almost view that as like a slow burn induction through all of the key facets of teaching through each of those 6 long terms of that 2-year period. So again, still with instructional coaching, but but perhaps slightly more facilitative in parts where the teacher already has a strong mental model in particular parts of the program, and then more directive in areas where they have a weaker mental model in that. And then for those that are sort of past ECT, probably two different models there. One that is more based around teachers having a conversation about their teaching, identifying a particular aspect of their teaching they want to develop, having a conversation with a colleague about different strategies that they might like to try, and then feeding back to each other based on what they see when they go in and visit each other's lessons. But then a fourth model of instructional coaching that I think needs to be driven through video. I'm a big believer in the power of video, and I think that's definitely a part of our instructional coaching offer that we'll move to. But that won't be something that's sort of pushed on anybody. It will be very much optional, and hopefully there'll be some take up to it. What do you think of that kind of differentiated approach?
Yeah, and I think, like, I guess some of that is sort of partially built into the structures that are already there. In that there's already an established pathway for ITTs and ECTs. So there is that expectation that they will have that sort of mentoring model, and that might have a coaching basis to it. But I think you're right that it's really important that we're able to differentiate and accept that we might think that instructional coaching is the best way forward for everybody, but it isn't going to work for everybody. And so having flexibility within that system, I think, is really important. Having something that doesn't feel imposed on everybody as a top-down thing, that like we're all doing it, that there's a bit of flex there, even if there are still some parameters around that that people still feel they have a bit of choice in what form that takes. Because I think nothing gets people's back up quicker in schools than just saying you're all doing this. When someone says, "Well, I don't want to," and I think you've obviously touched on another massive challenge within instructional coaching is how you best cater for the needs of teachers with massively different levels of experience and expertise. And I think it's kind of easy to see how an instructional coaching model fits with someone who is an early career teacher, very much a novice, still learning their craft, and things start getting more tricky, interesting, challenging, whichever of those words you want, when you start working with more experienced teachers. And working out how to pitch that and knowing how to pitch that at the right level is, I think, really, really tricky, but also really interesting. I think your point earlier about thinking that you might be sort of as far as you've got with the kind of peer coaching model at the moment. I think part of that is I'm guessing, and forgive me if I'm making an incorrect assumption here, that's to do with the investment of sort of the training of coaches to be able to take that coaching forward, because actually to be able to have that responsiveness that we talked about before, where you're able to ask good questions, observe and listen really carefully, and essentially make a diagnosis of their mental model, which you mentioned a few times, to then pivot and work out which way the discussion needs to go, the extent to which you're going to ask them questions to draw things out versus leading them perhaps in a direction because you think there might be something useful to explore. That takes a lot of time and practice and skill to be able to do, and so to invest in your coaches to be able to do it at that level is quite a big step, isn't it? So that's probably where the peer coaching model, I think, has one of its bigger limitations is there's a point of expertise that you probably can't get to in that system, but having that available at another level, I think is a good way around that.
Yeah, I think that there's a difference between talking about and using. So I think there's a difference between talking about an agreed model of teaching and using that agreed model of teaching as a basis for a really powerful conversation and a really informative and reflective conversation. I think there's a difference between that and deliberately actually trying to align someone else's weaker mental model of teaching with a stronger mental model, and actually trying to make adaptations and changes to a mental model. And okay, I get that you can you can meet someone halfway and you adapt your mental model, they adapt theirs, and I would include that within that sort of second type of challenge. But I think trying to make adaptations to a mental model is a different challenge than using a shared mental model as the basis of a reflective conversation. And I think that, like you say, it's a very different skill set, and it's a skill set that I think requires genuine commitment and interest in. I think if you're a teacher that doesn't have that innate interest in helping other colleagues to get better in the most effective way, I think it's going to be difficult for me as a PD lead to get those people to the point where they're wanting to deliver that type of instructional coaching increasingly effectively. So yeah, it's, again, I suppose that's one of the biggest implementation challenges, isn't it? Is that the resources that you have available to you, your best resources are, as coaches, are your teachers, but you've got to work with the models that they've got an investment in as well. And I think, do you know, the other thing I think is really important with all of this as well is that we have this thing about, you know, continuously striving to get better and better and better and better, and that is really, really important. And I'd never kind of be apologetic about that, but I do at the same time think it's important to reflect back and think, all right, well, if I've got these two teachers who are, you know, once every couple of weeks going in to watch each other, once every couple of weeks having a reflective conversation using a shared language around a shared model of teaching, and they both feel like they're having the opportunity to reflect on their teaching in a non-threatening and non-judgmental way, that is infinitely better than 3 formal lesson observations a year, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think there's you're right. We mentioned earlier that it's about that culture that talking about teaching and learning is just, you know, the norm. It's expected, and that you're right that there are teachers who are, you know, very, very competent, who will get good outcomes, who have, you know, strong relationships with their pupils and things like that. And of course, there are things they can do that get better. But yeah, we've also just got to keep that perspective of it's not for everyone gung ho, right, go, you know, action step, and, you know, this kind of relentless drive that people go through peaks and troughs as well, and there's going to be times when, you know, they're really pressured and they've got other things going on, and so if you've got that structure in place, that the cultural norm is that people generally want to get better and have a way of doing that, but you've got to, you know, balance that out with the general humanness of people's and the messiness of like a busy school, and that, you know, people will incrementally get better, but yeah, maybe it doesn't want to feel kind of too pressured, does it? There was something else, sorry, you said in there which I've now just gone from my head. I'll come back to it. I was going to pick up on your point about video as well, because I think I agree with you that that's incredibly powerful, and one of the best things I think that helps a coaching conversation move forward is to be able to talk about evidence from a lesson. That's and that doesn't have to be video. I think it's worth saying that, you know, it can simply be just that you've written down some, you know, something that somebody said, or you have like tallied up the number of students who are doing a particular thing, or you might take a picture of someone's book or whiteboard or whatever. So there's lots of ways to gather that evidence. Obviously, video is really powerful in lots of ways because it gives you lots of stuff, and you can kind of see it for real rather than, well, this is what I wrote down that someone said. But I think that in itself is quite an implementation challenge too, in terms of, you know, what's the infrastructure around that? What devices are people using? How are you getting permission from all your pupils and from your teachers, and who wants to be videoed and who doesn't, and where do you store it, and all that sort of stuff. And there's an awful lot of really boring detail in there, but you've got to wade through that detail if you're going to make that work. So yeah, I'll be interested to know how you're approaching that, I think, and what the solutions are and what you think the barriers are going to be, or the challenges you're working on there.
Yeah, do you know, the biggest thing that I would implore anybody to do if you're going to start using video in instructional coaching, or indeed any form of professional development, is just never, ever, ever use video to prove to somebody that they're not doing something right. And, you know, I've seen that done, and it's been done to me as well many, many times where people have gone, well, look, you can see in that video you're doing that there, and you should have been doing this, and you weren't doing it, were you? Because you just saw it on that video, and I've proved it, haven't I? And if you use video, and this is where I do think video can be perhaps at times more powerful than this is what I saw, this is what the kid said, this is what, you know, this was my perception of what you did. If you've used video, and whether you're viewing that video coach and teacher together for the first time, or whether you view it separately and then come together, or whether the teacher views it first and then brings it to the coach and then they watch it together. I don't think that's sort of critical either way, really. But if you're using that video as a basis of evidence together, and the ethos of the use of that video is, okay, what does this video tell us? What's the indisputable stuff that it's definitely telling us? That kid's off task there, or I don't know, that was a really well crafted explanation, whatever it might be, positive or negative. But if you're using it to go, okay, this is the stuff that it's definitely telling us, what else can we infer from that together? And that bit of the conversation is really, really co-constructed. And you can, I absolutely believe you can have an element of challenge in that. So, someone says, and the example I give all the time is, you've got a video of the start of a lesson and it's super buzzy and, excited and all that kind of thing. And you go, okay, so let's look at what's going on here. There's lots of noise, there's lots of excitement, blah, 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 blah. And the teacher goes, yeah, I think that's exactly what I want, because, everyone's really excited and wants to be there. And with my coaching hat on, I'm there thinking, okay, I think actually they're kind of off task there, because you wanted them attending to that activity that you had on the board, that do now activity. You wanted them all really, really focused on, and they weren't. And actually, if you look at that kid there and that kid there, and perhaps that's me seeing those things, but then for me to then be able to say to that teacher, okay, using that evidence, can you justify to me then, or justify to yourself, or explain why you see that as such a positive? Or where's the evidence that that's a really positive thing? And as long as people are comfortable with that kind of challenge, I do think there's a definite place for that there. So I think the opportunity to use video to co-construct a shared perception of what's happening is probably goes beyond what you can get from an observation and observation notes from a coach. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. I think given the choice, and assuming that everyone involved was happy with it, I think video is way more powerful. I suppose my challenge to it, and it is purely like one on a pragmatic basis, is given the sometimes difficulty of getting that in place, is whether it's perceived in your organisation to be like it's enough for us to invest in that when we could be doing other things instead, because it's a time investment. So I think if you've got good solutions to all the technical problems around it, and you've got a culture where everyone's going to go for it, then yeah, absolutely, I'd say video is your number one. But I suppose I'm saying that it's also valid to collect other forms of evidence, and that if you can't use video for some reason or can't get it working, that's not a reason to go, oh, well, we won't do it. It's okay, well, we'll start off building up with other kinds of evidence, and hopefully at some point we'll get to that. The other thing I thought you were going to say when you said the one piece of advice was probably also to watch yourself on video first, and watch that back before you go and film anyone else and make them watch themselves teaching, because it's just one of the most humbling and cringeworthy experiences in my experience, at least, and reveals all kinds of things you just had no idea you were doing. And I think having been through that yourself is really, really powerful and really important before you subject somebody else to it. I remember, the first time I ever watched myself on video, and the number of times I said so, and the classic, those sorts of things, but also because I only teach A level, how sarcastic I was when I was teaching, and it was only, and I just sort of assumed that my students kind of went with it, and then it occurred to me from watching the video that actually it didn't land with half of them. They had no idea what I was talking about, and I was making references to things they didn't understand, but that sheer power of seeing it back for myself was so left such an impression on me. So I think that's really important that we do that, and I suppose that we can open ourselves up to it as well, that if we want to prepare, we want to model something, that videoing ourselves doing that as well is quite a useful thing to be doing, partly to sort of share that vulnerability that I'm coming into your lessons, I'm invading your space, you can come into mine, and again, whether that's live or video, I think that also part of the coaching relationship is really important, that there's that sort of reciprocity there.
Yeah, 100%. And it's a big part of, or I think anyway, it's a big part of why in my school I feel like teachers are fairly comfortable having me in their classrooms, because whenever I do any professional development, inevitably I will have a video of me of me teaching in one capacity or another, and it's always with the disclaimer of this isn't me going do it like this. and this all because this is brilliant, but equally I'm also saying this isn't terrible either. Like, so let's critique it together. And I remember we did one earlier on this year, and it was actually as part of an instructional coaching training session. I was trying to train people to identify to identify the point in a lesson where or the point in a teaching sequence that they would zoom in on to start thinking about a development point for this teacher, which was me in this case. And every single one of them picked out like the rate of participation from the kids, and it was really low. But like in the moment, it didn't feel like that was a particular issue, because again, I wasn't doing one of these lessons that people do where they go, "Now I've made a deliberate mistake here," because I just think that's just packed with arrogance there, that, you know, unless I'd done a deliberate mistake, I obviously wasn't going to make one. But that wasn't something that I'd particularly picked up when I was teaching it. But lo and behold, when everybody was making the point about why they thought that would be the area they would work on, I was bang on board with it, because it was absolutely the right place. Okay, let's go to the news, and then when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about one of the other really thorny challenges around the implementation of instructional coaching and how to align it with other forms of PD.
Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org. Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now you can with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised social platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with their peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques, designed to help you quickly and easily implement high-impact practices that boost student engagement and improve learning outcomes. Join over 200 institutions worldwide that are elevating their teaching practices with the How-To app. No gurus, just practical support anytime you need it. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for our next webinar.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by thought leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The lineup included renowned speakers such as TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, and beloved children's author Michael Rosen. The three-day conference explored a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free by visiting the Reading Solutions UK website at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Artificial intelligence is in the news after a study at a UK university conducted a real-life Turing test. The University of Reading published its findings in the PLOS ONE Science Journal. In the study, 33 alias student profiles were set up by the university's tech team. The alias students were all completing Bachelor of Science degrees in psychology across different years of study. The researchers helped the students to complete a range of exams and online assignments using unedited answers written by ChatGPT-4. Researchers found that 94% of their AI submissions slipped by the examiners unnoticed, and the AI students did better than their peers, with an 83.4% chance they could outperform a random selection of real student submissions. One of the study's authors said it should be a wake-up call for educators. A recent UNESCO survey found that less than 10% of schools worldwide have policies or guidance in place regarding generative AI. Further details of the study can be found in the PLOS ONE Science Journal. Middlesbrough Council East of England is to trial auto-enrolment for free school meals, according to the local government website. The pilot scheme will ensure automatic enrolment as a safety net for children whose families do not apply. Parents will have the right to opt out. The council said reasons for families not claiming free school meals included not understanding the application process, low levels of literacy, language barriers, and stigma. A sample of 60 Middlesbrough households found 11 eligible families were not signed up for free school meals, and the council said this meant schools missing out on thousands of pounds in funding. A similar process introduced in Sheffield in 2016 saw £3.8 million worth of extra pupil premium funding allocated as a result of auto-enrolment. The Star in Sheffield reports that universities in the city have launched litter patrols to reduce what they call end-of-term dumping. According to the article, enforcers will be out in force over the coming days as tenancies come to an end and 50,000 students move out of their rented accommodation. The joint approach by Sheffield and Hallam universities comes after residents complained about piles of rubbish left on pavements. Both universities have said that they work closely with the City Council and give regular reminders to students to put excess waste in bags neatly outside. A spokesperson went on to highlight that since 2013, students in Sheffield have raised over £1 million for the British Heart Foundation by donating items at the end of term rather than throwing them out. Schools Week reports that trusts are warning they face having to make significant redundancies and have no choice but to exclude vulnerable children following shock cuts to SEND budgets in the middle of the year. Multi-academy trusts have written to Norfolk County Council in a last-ditch bid to avoid a funding cliff edge, after learning last week how a revised approach to top-up funding would impact them. As first reported by Schools Week in January, Norfolk was not then on track to meet its government safety valve agreement. In January, it received £70 million to balance its high-needs budget, but was told to submit revised plans and to join an enhanced monitoring scheme. The council has adjusted overall top-up funding allocations to remain within budget, but this means allocations will fall. The council acknowledge it will create some challenges for schools. The letter, signed by the heads of 5 multi-academy trusts in the area, have revealed their shock and disappointment and stated it will result in significant redundancies. It goes on to say the effect on children will be negative in the extreme. The full article can be read on the Schools Week website. Finally, the BBC News website reports that Japanese Emperor Naruhito has returned to Oxford University as part of his state visit. The Emperor, then Crown Prince, attended Merton College, complete with security detail, during the early 1980s. A former roommate of the Emperor said he was very down to earth and didn't use a title, preferring to be called Hero whilst he completed his studies. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Okay, welcome back. So, Paul, one of the biggest questions that I get asked, and one of the biggest questions that I know lots of people get asked, is how do you integrate instructional coaching with other forms of professional development in school? And like more often than not, when people ask this, it's to try and get to the bottom of like, how do you make time for everything? Because often it's seen as an additional type of professional development rather than something that's integrated with what you're already doing, or with some of your broader professional development aims. So yeah, how do you integrate them together?
Oh, yeah, that's a tricky question. So I suppose it comes back to that initial like thinking about like why are we introducing instructional coaching and what are we trying to achieve here in terms of the culture of the school. And obviously on the broad level, that's, you know, we want to help everyone get better. So we've got to think about that in quite a holistic way, and instructional coaching is just one element of that. Because of so many of the challenges we've already talked about, it's probably less usual that you're able to go, right, everyone's on instructional coaching, off we go. And as we've already discussed, you know, that might not even be sort of appropriate or desirable. So there needs to be other ways that we can make sure that people are getting access to good quality professional development. So obviously schools have different CPD structures. I mentioned earlier that at my school we used to have it where it was essentially twilight sessions or the occasional inset day, and we know that they weren't sort of impacting in any real meaningful way for most people's practice. So one of the things that we did was look at moving CPD into the school day. So it's now a thing that people get on an afternoon off timetable, because we're trying to signal that it's important and that we want everybody to attend it, and not just those people who happen to be free on that night who haven't got childcare commitments and all the rest of it. So there's not really a reason why everyone can't get that entitlement to PD. So I suppose that's a core principle which needs to run through sort of all of your offer, that this is important. We are making time for it. We are going to find a way to get around the challenges of time. Because we believe in this. I think some schools, you know, have gone way further. I know quite a lot of schools have kind of operated a model where the whole school finishes early on a particular day, or they have something in place that means all of the teachers can be off timetable and everyone gets, you know, weekly or fortnightly departmental CPD. And that might sort of dovetail with the coaching program. But again, it's about that sort of showing that we're serious about this. We want this to happen. So I think sort of that fundamental commitment to it has to be in place, so that you're sending out this clear signal. We think this is important. I think a second thing, which again you sort of mentioned earlier, was this idea of a shared language and understanding around teaching and learning. I think there has to be something that underpins everything, so that whether it's in a PD session, or whether it's in a coaching session, or whether it's just in an email exchange, or whether it's, you know, somebody sending someone a blog and going, oh, I read this and thought this was interesting, or an inset day, that there's some core principles about teaching and learning that everybody in the school understands, because then that provides like a background to any of those conversations. And again, I think that's really, really important that we try and sort of foster that, develop that in lots of different ways. And it's not just that we're trying to, you know, we have got to have that in place, but actually having different strands of PD is a good way of trying to make that language spread and sort of embed within the organisation, because it's constantly being used in those different settings. So I suppose those are, off the top of my head, the top two things is, first of all, is making the time for it and signalling the intent with that and the commitment. And then having that shared framework and language underpinning it all, so that there's, you know, people are talking around common ground. So what's your thoughts on that while I consider any others?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've made two really really good points there. I think that it starts from schools really considering what their overall professional development priorities are. So, what is
Yeah.
it that you want to get better at as a school, and then what are the adaptations that you need to make to those goals for specific teams within a primary setting, for example. I think often adaptations aren't made successfully enough for the early years. Often early years teachers kind of sit in professional development that really isn't pitched at the specific challenges of early years, and often I think that PD should kind of be adapted for the needs and the priorities of that particular team. And I think from there, as much as you possibly can, you kind of want your individual development, professional development priorities to feed down from those team priorities and from those whole school priorities, if you possibly can. It won't always align. So, like, you know, in a school where behavior management, let's say, is really really strong, and there's a really strong culture of an ethos around behavior and attitudes, you might have a teacher that really struggles with behavior management, and so it's not going to be a whole school priority, but it does need to be an individual priority for that person. And that's, you could work on that through instructional coaching, and that, I think, that's probably the right thing to do. But I think, as if you can see opportunities to align all of those layers of PD from whole school to team to individual, I think you should take them. So, for example, something that I'm already thinking for next year at our place that will be a professional development priority will be our assessment for learning within science. So I don't think that we, on an ongoing basis, I don't think that as a team we've got a strong enough knowledge of how to assess what kids know and what they can do within the subject of science, and crucially then respond to it. So, we will do a lot of work around the importance of, as a whole team, around the importance of misconceptions and identifying misconceptions, and we'll look at particular strategies for identifying misconceptions and getting them to be revealed, and the importance of revealing children's thinking, and we'll look at different contextual variations on those strategies. So, when would it be this strategy instead of this one? Which children in your class would need this strategy instead of that one, for example? And then my sort of intention at the moment, and this isn't something that we've rolled out yet, but my intention would then be, okay, so in that case, when you're doing your instructional coaching on an individual level, let's try and think within that same space. So let's try and think within that checking for understanding space. So is it that as an individual you're going to decide that you're going to work on your cold calling routines, or you're going to work on your use of mini whiteboards to make sure that you're using mini whiteboards for answers that are really short and sharp for kids to write, so that you can really quickly scan the room and get a good idea of what every kid thinks, from just based on the answer that they've actually displayed on that mini whiteboard. So I think, as much as you possibly can, if there are opportunities to align whole school priorities with team priorities and with individual priorities, I think taking advantage of that will make it more likely that that change will be sustained as well for each of those individuals.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, like, part of that is signaling that this is all joined up, and that's really important, that people get that the things are actually aligned with each other. And I suppose so. Another element of that is making sure that the way that you deliver any other form of PD within your school has some similar principles to it in instructional coaching, like both in terms of sort of the mechanics of it, so that we might try and deliberately include some modeling and, if we think appropriate, rehearsal or whatever, and those sort of mechanisms, but also that general ethos of, we're not going to try and, like, go back down the old route of, like, here's 10 different things that you can think about, and now off you go and try and implement them all. That actually we take things slowly. We recognize that we're giving things time to breathe, because I think that's one of the most powerful things about instructional coaching, is that one-to-one sort of fast cycle of it, that you're kind of continuously having conversations and watching bits of lessons and going on and on, that although you can sort of make quite a lot of progress in that, it is a deliberately slow process with one small thing at a time. And I think that your broader CPD model needs to kind of reflect that as well, that it doesn't feel like you're just flying from one initiative to another. Again, that kind of, initiative fatigue that we've all experienced in the past, where it was just, oh, what's the latest thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And pretty soon we know that led to that sort of, well, I'll just keep my head down and ignore it, because then the next thing will come along and then I can ignore that one as well. And that sense that actually, no, we're moving with purpose, I think is really important. And it's interesting you said there about, you're thinking about, your priorities for next year. We started talking about that earlier at the start of this term. We started to go, okay, right, we're going to have to think about next year. What are we going to do with it? And actually, the decision we came to was, well, we've done quite a lot of input over the last couple of years. Let's just stop and pause and recap with that and try and refine it and embed and reflect the things that people are doing. Again, to try and recognise that we've given a lot of information and we've gone through a lot of ideas and we've shared lots of new things, that we now need to just give everyone time to do that. So again, that sense of we want this to stick, it has to underpin absolutely everything. I think the other thing to say, again, into kind of where does instructional coaching fit within this model, is that quite a lot of other types of PD, particularly I'm thinking a CPD session or an inset day session, are often more about kind of the input, here is a new thing, or here is a way to deal with a challenge that we're all facing. So, the example you've used several times is I want to increase my participation ratio in my classroom. I want to make sure everyone's thinking. We could use cold calling and we can use mini whiteboards, and these are the strategies to deal with that problem. And it's way more efficient to do that at scale if it's something that you think is a whole school improvement priority, that you do that in that setting where you get it to everybody. But that's only going to raise people's knowledge and awareness of it. They might, develop insights in sort of how and when they might use it. But the coaching is where you get to then work more specifically on the actual implementation and where people get to contextualize that.
Love that, yeah.
And so it's sort of seeing that, they're serving slightly different purposes there. That one is more about the what and one is more about the how, in a very, very sort of loose sense. With lots of nuance around that. That's a massive oversimplification, but I think seeing the different role that those different PD inputs are playing, I think is quite important in making sure that instructional coaching fits within that and has that alignment to the whole school PD.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that many people will be aware of Sam Sims' paper from 2021, where the research team came up with those 17 mechanisms of effective professional development. But another thing that I think is that's kind of the headline of that paper. But some of the other sort of smaller takeaways from that I think are often missed is like, okay, well, how do you actually plan professional development then to integrate all of these mechanisms together? And I think sometimes a misreading of that particular paper can lead people to think, right, okay, I've got to do one professional development session and pack all of that into there. Whereas actually, I think if you were to look at it as like if people started planning professional development as sequences rather than as standalone sessions, and that's something that at my school we've moved towards that in the second half of this year. If we plan professional development as sequences of sessions, and each session is slightly different, but each session taps into different ones of those mechanisms, and ideally more than one mechanism at the same time, but not packing all of them into one session. I think there are massive gains from that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think like the danger you're describing there is that it gets turned into just another checklist, doesn't it? Of like, oh, have we done modelling? Yep, check. Have we got rehearsal in there? Check. Have we got social support? And great if you can do it because that's how it's going to work. But if you're sort of shoehorning it in just because you think you have to, and you're right, it's about that bigger picture across all of the PD provision that we're offering. Do we have balance across the different areas that the EF paper recognises, building knowledge and motivating and all that stuff. So it has balance across those areas, and that there are different things happening in different things, and you don't have to hit it all in one go. And instructional coaching is again part of the reason why again Sam Sims sort of made that point about it's one of the best evidence forms, is because it's probably the form that allows you to have the most of those mechanisms in one kind of concentrated way. But that doesn't mean that other forms that do it in a slightly different way aren't also really, really powerful. And like I say, if we can sort of align those, then people are getting a really, really strong provision sort of all together.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example of a sequence that we're in at the moment, and tell me what you think of this. So we've identified a problem that we want to solve as a staff, and it's around our maths provision. So we don't think we're giving enough opportunity for guided practice within our maths lessons. We're a primary school for context. So the maths leaders, for her, she's got 4 sessions, and she's planned her first session around some shared reading. So she's got a chapter from a book that she thinks exemplifies the point that she wants to make over the course of the whole sequence really nicely. So the first session is just a case of shared reading and then reflection on that. So everyone just sits, reads the same chapter together. We talk about it. She's got some prompt questions in mind, but ultimately the conversation goes where it goes, and inevitably it centres around what parts of this do you feel like you're already doing, what parts of it do you think are new, and how do we kind of align those two things together to kind of come to like a new understanding. Her second session is going to be more kind of more of your sort of traditional leader at the front, teaching everybody else something new about this thing that they want them to do. And as part of that, we'll get some modelling in there. We'll get some instruction in there. Potentially, if we can get people out of seats, we might get some rehearsal in there. And then the third session is going to be a lesson study. So it will be her or somebody else filmed, and then as a staff, we'll identify all of the aspects from the actions that we said we were going to take, that we can see evident in that, and then the actions that we don't, and we'll talk about the challenges of it and which bits are we all kind of getting stuck on, which bits are we finding easier. And then in the fourth session, we'll kind of all sit together and plan out the bits of it that we're still, well, the successes first of all, sharing all of the good practice, but then really planning the bits that we're all really getting stuck on. And the idea will be that is the stuff that the leader then goes on to monitor moving forward, because what we want to happen is for monitoring to be a case of that's kind of like the continual individual support that people get from the subject leader once that initial cycle of PD is finished. And the other thing to point out there as well is that those sessions don't all happen in 1 week after the other. So those 4 sessions will take place over about 8 to 9 weeks. Now, in the meantime, my hunch, and this isn't what we've got for this term, but moving forward, my hunch is that instructional coaching would be a really, really good way of implementing those changes throughout that 8 to 9 week period to kind of really encode the learning that's taking place in those sessions.
Yeah, that's a really interesting model. I think it's really clear that you, like we talked about, you thought really carefully, like you say, about the sequencing, and that you're not trying to do it too quickly. It's not just right, everyone we're doing this, off we go. That there's a proper bit of exploration there with the reading first, but it's still sort of relatively short in the sense that that's, you know, in the space of a term or less than a term, you've got quite a meaty sense of progress going on, I suppose. That's an odd phrase, but you know, you're kind of moving somewhere with that, and I think you're right that the instructional coaching absolutely can support that really, really well. And I suppose what will become kind of then interesting and challenging is once you get to that point where everyone's had a play around with it, is that people will then probably be at different sort of places with that in terms of who needs support with which specific bit. And I suppose that's where the power of the instructional coaching model to support that really comes into its own, because that's where you can then offer that individualized support. Whereas if you just said, right, come back and we'll all sit and talk together about it, and suddenly you've got 10 people all with a slightly different challenge, that becomes a much more difficult thing to deal with as a PD leader. But actually in the coaching context, then yeah, you can go through that one-to-one. So that sounds like a really interesting and well thought out approach. Great to hear how it goes.
Yeah, and I think again, it's as with everything, isn't it? In theory, it feels like it would work, but it's only in practice when we'll see where the kind of cracks are to it. But I do think that, like you say, using instructional coaching as a way of implementing those wider PD goals does mean it does give you the flex to kind of concentrate support on a particular area for teachers who perhaps are getting stuck on a particular thing, but also broaden it out and invite the teachers that have mastered it to kind of see where else they can take it. So if there will be teachers who are really good at providing lots of guided practice within our maths lessons, and so for those, I guess it's about probably taking a slightly more dialogical approach and going, okay, so where could we take this next? How is there a way that we can extend the thinking of this group of pupils while at the same time supporting the practice of this group of pupils here, and what about this pupil here at the same time? How do you guide the practice of these two different groups of pupils plus this one over here that's on a completely different curriculum? How do you make sure that you're guiding the practice of all of those pupils all at the same time when their needs are so different, which is obviously a slightly more expert challenge, I guess. But yeah, hopefully the use of instructional coaching will allow us the flex to be able to do that under that kind of consistent umbrella, which will mean that the kind of thinking will be focused and deep on that particular area that we all kind of want to get a little bit better at. Okay, let's go to our final ad break and hear a few messages from our friends and partners, and then when we come back, I'm going to ask Paul to talk to us a little bit about rehearsal.
Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org. Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now you can with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised social platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with their peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques, designed to help you quickly and easily implement high-impact practices that boost student engagement and improve learning outcomes. Join over 200 institutions worldwide that are elevating their teaching practices with the How-To app. No gurus, just practical support anytime you need it. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for our next webinar.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by thought leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The lineup included renowned speakers such as TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, and beloved children's author Michael Rosen. The three-day conference explored a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free by visiting the Reading Solutions UK website at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk.
Okay, welcome back. So, Paul, rehearsal. It is a really thorny issue. You wrote a fabulous blog recently that got lots of interest and lots of people talking about this particular issue. Do you want to start us off by just giving us a brief overview of what rehearsal is and what we mean when we talk about it?
Yeah, I think you've started with actually probably the most important question, and possibly where some of the interesting discussion came out of the blog that I wrote and the subsequent conversations around that is actually what people are talking about when they talk about rehearsal. So I think if we kind of wind back a little bit, a few years ago, everyone was talking about deliberate practice all the time, and lots of schools still are, and they say, we do deliberate practice, and that was something quite clearly defined in the literature as a specific thing. And Nick Pointer's written this really brilliant series of blog posts where he sort of unpicks the issues around the term deliberate practice and whether people are actually doing it when they say they're doing it. And I think rehearsal kind of became maybe a softer term or an easier term that for people to use. And I think it's really important that we define what we're actually talking about when we talk about it, because I think it's too easily taken to mean, and you sort of alluded to it earlier with, in the example of your PD sessions, that it's the kind of on your feet performative nature of rehearsal. It's the stand up and do it. So if I'm going to, look at how I'm going to signal for attention in my classroom, then I'm going to literally stand there and practice going, okay, everyone, pens down, eyes on me in 3, 2, 1, that sort of thing. And then, you can have rounds of that and get feedback on how that's gone, and you can start to, push it in different ways. And that is absolutely a valid form of rehearsal. I think where I worry is that that's seen as the only form of rehearsal, and that rehearsal can clearly be sort of more cognitive, more mental. It can be about the decisions that you're making. I think rehearsal could just include almost discussion of how and where you're going to do something, although I'm not sure if that's exactly rehearsal, but I think it's something that has to accompany it. And I think it's therefore just difficult to have a conversation around it without really clarifying within a specific context what we're talking about. And as I said, I think my hunch is that we have over privileged, overvalued the stand on your feet and do rehearsal above everything else. It feels like sometimes that's become sort of dogma that you have to do that, otherwise it's not coaching, and you're not doing it properly. But actually, I think there's value in other forms of rehearsal, and there's times when that's just not necessary. So that's probably a much longer answer than you wanted with a what is rehearsal, but I think that's probably part of the issues around it is that it's not always well defined, or we haven't got a shared meaning of what we're talking about when we talk about rehearsal. How does that
I think it's a long
experience?
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, I mean, I think it's a long answer because I think the parameters of it are quite wide. And I think you're right. I think often we think about the rehearsal of the execution of the technique, and I absolutely, personally, my current thinking on it is, and I know not everybody agrees with this, but my current thinking on it is that rehearsal of execution is absolutely valuable. I've just sat with in so many instructional coaching sessions where we've gone to rehearse something that just feels so straightforward, and literally teachers go, surely we don't have to practice that, and we've practiced it. And then when I say rehearsal, I'm also including the modelling of me having a go as well, and then also the teacher having a go. And we've practiced it, and it's like, oh no, that didn't quite land properly. That didn't quite work. Right, let's try it slightly differently. Let's try. I remember doing one like we were talking about when we were asking a question and leaving a pause for thinking time. And going, actually, what do you do when you're waiting during that pause time? And we hadn't even considered that. And actually, it was only something that we realised we needed to consider when we started to rehearse it. So I absolutely think there is value in that for me anyway.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and have experienced that exact thing in terms of my own teaching, and in terms of some of the people I'm working with when I'm coaching. That for specific behavioural things, as in this is how I'm going to stand there and do this when I'm in my class, that rehearsal is super powerful. And yes, it's something that we should definitely try and get people to do. So I guess the question is, does that encompass all of the things that we want teachers to be doing when we're doing instructional coaching, and all of the goals that we might be setting together with them? And I think my answer to that would be no, it doesn't. And so it's not being so convinced that we have to do rehearsal that you end up steering the coaching towards something that can be rehearsed in a performative type way, as opposed to going, well, actually, there's a different challenge here that might be something that isn't actually rehearsable in that sense, but that's more important than the thing that's sort of obviously visible and performable.
I think you're right. I mean, I think that the idea of rehearsing thinking and rehearsing choices and rehearsing the decision-making process is also really, really valuable. And it's something that I do quite a lot in my coaching sessions, is when we are using that rehearsal, often we'll, a teacher will start rehearsing a particular technique, and we'll have a pause button, and I'll press the pause button and go, okay, now at this point in time, what choices have you got? And they'll talk about the different options, the different strategy options or technique options that they've got at that particular time. And then I'll ask, okay, so what contextual factors influence your decision? And they might go, okay, so if I'm going to pick on Jack, then I'm going to use this strategy. If, the whole multitude of contextual factors that influence whether you use one technique over another, but it's rehearsing the thought processes in the moment and doing that really, really deliberately. Because interesting, comes back to that idea of deliberate practice that you were talking about earlier. Doing it really deliberately in the hope that when it comes to the moment, that becomes increasingly automated. And I know that there is this argument that actually rehearsing something 3 times in an instructional coaching session isn't going to automate it when it actually comes to the moment of performance, which is in the lesson. But at the very least, it starts that automation process. It kicks that automation process off. And when I think about, I've got a background in tennis coaching, and when I think about the sort of top level of tennis coaching that I did, when we were rehearsing strokes with players, it wasn't about trying to necessarily increase the quality of their very, very best backhand. It was trying to make it more likely that their base level of backhand would deliver in that pressurized moment of a tennis match. And I think that's similar in a way to what we're trying to achieve with rehearsal with a teacher. It's not necessarily about going, your cold calling needs to be better and better and better and better. It's trying to make sure that, like, your base level of cold calling, the cold calling that you will execute at that absolutely ultra reliable level, your sort of bare minimum, if you like, standard of cold calling is ultra reliable. And you're not going to have those dips when it ends up being used completely out of context and in completely the wrong way. You're trying to kind of eradicate those moments and eradicate them in a way that is automated in the moment, so you don't lose the flow of the lesson.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that links back to the idea of, like, rehearsal has to take place in a context where you're discussing other things first. And you talked about, that might include some modelling. So we're going to show what it looks like. And I would include with that, the idea that there's got to be some sense of a clear success criteria or a marker of quality. What are we actually aiming for here? And again, I guess that's what you're alluding to there, that there is an agreed, it's got to have these elements and they've got to be executed. And you're making sure that that's consistent. Even if you're right, there might be room for manoeuvre around the edges, or we could tweak that a little bit better. But we want to make sure that they've got a sense of these are the things we've got to make sure we're doing when we're executing that particular technique. I suppose, again, where I would be sort of then interested in do we need to get up on our feet and do it? Is the, like you say, the decisions around that. So using cold calling is a great example. We can do the rehearsal of the actual execution of it. Standing there and making sure how you frame, how you're going to pick somebody, the wait time, the waiting to listen to their response, they're bouncing it to someone else, or whatever you do with that. There's a layer behind that, which is actually, what question are you asking? And that's a curriculum question which can't be rehearsed in the same way. The rehearsal there would be the discussion of, okay, well, let's look at your topic. what are the, what's the key learning point here? What's the thing that you've got to assess before you move on, that you want to question them on? Okay, what answers? Now you can rehearse types of questions, but but by rehearsal there, we don't mean, right, stand up and ask me one question, now ask me a different question. It's more of a discussion around, well, I could ask this and I could ask that, and what would the wording of that one be like, and how would that land compared to that one? To me, that counts within that sort of idea of rehearsal, because you're rehearsing the thinking that is required to get them ready to do it in the lesson, but it doesn't require them to then for that bit of it to be like, okay, right, on your feet and doing it. It's much more like the thinking that goes with it that's being rehearsed there, rather than the execution of the technique. So I think it's, again, as a coach, knowing what the primary goal is and what you're trying to achieve with the person you're working with, as to where you go with that level of rehearsal.
Fantastic, Paul. That's a great place to finish. I think you've and thanks so much for your openness on that as well. Because I know it's not easy to talk about that particular issue, because I think, again, with everything to do with instructional coaching, views can be so polarized on it, that actually trying to sort of bring a lot of this thinking together can be really difficult. But hopefully, I feel like we've kind of moved some way towards doing that tonight. So thanks so much for coming on and talking us through it all.
Yeah, I suppose if I can just say one other thing on that, it was really interesting. I know you chatted to Jim Knight recently, and he said, we don't use rehearsal, but I'm open to being convinced that it would make our coaching better. And I suppose that's a kind of nice way of thinking about it, is that if Jim doesn't need to use it or thinks it's not important, then that's worth listening to. But equally, he's open to saying, well, maybe it's something we should explore further. And I think it's that exploration of it as an idea is where we need to keep being open, rather than it becoming a dogmatic thing everyone must do in a very particular way. So hopefully that comes across.
Totally. And I think that's a really good ethos to kind of come at all of this stuff with, is just, remain open-minded and willing to learn new stuff, however long we've kind of been at it. So yeah, for sure. Paul, thanks so much for everything this evening. Thank you as well to everybody that's been listening along. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. Do stick around on Teachers Talk Radio this evening and tune in to listen to Ray on the Late Show at 9:00. And other than that, that's everything from me. And I will see you again next week with another guest and another topic to delve into here on Teachers Talk Radio.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.